Welcome to my tribute and memories of Alexander Schreiner. Alexander Schreiner was a phenomenal talent. He was accompanying the choir and playing for services for his local congregation as early as 8 years of age. He said he practiced diligently, worked hard, and eventually he was studying with the finest organists in France, Louis Vierne and Charles Marie Widor. Vierne said of him that he had such technical mastery that he could play at sight the most difficult passages. So with hard work and great talent, he became one of the leading musicians and top organists of the 20th century. His life was well documented. I have 3 books. His memoirs, Alexander Schreiner Reminiscences. The book, Alexander Schreiner, Mormon Tabernacle Organist. And Alexander Schreiner, California Years. 10 years before he went to the Tabernacle full-time, he was university organist at UCLA. At UCLA, he became acquainted with the new organ in Royce Hall, which had been voiced and finished by G. Donald Harrison. He liked it very much and wanted it for the Tabernacle, and eventually he was able to get that, and we got the fabulous Tabernacle Organist. He encouraged young organists, myself included, and so while I was in California still, I was the beneficiary of some of that encouragement. When I was in high school, he, through the Brigham Young University, gave a class, a week-long class in organ playing, which I, of course, signed up for. And it was a wonderful experience. Besides teaching us how to play hymns and musical interpretation, he had some interesting lectures. In one of them, he asked, "Who builds the organs that we play?" And people raised their hand. Hammond, Baldwin, Kahn, Allen. When I raised my hand, I'd say, Aeolian Skinner, Shantz, Austin. And then he looked at me and he says, there's one more that belongs over here. He says, they're from Kansas. And I said, Reuter. And so he wrote that. He had the Allen and Baldwin and Hammond on one side, and the Aeolian Skinner and the others on the other side. And then he said, I'm often asked when a new organ is put into one of the chapels to come and play an opening recital. He says, if it's one of these, and he pointed to the Hammond Baldwin side, says, I don't care if it has 5 keyboards and 200 stops. I don't want to play it. Please don't ask me to come. Then he pointed to the other side of the board, the Aeolian Skinner and Shantz, and he says, if, however, you have one of these, I don't care if it's just 1 keyboard and only 2 stops. I'd be happy to come and play a recital on it. He also mentioned an experience when he was university organist at UCLA and teaching a music appreciation class. And he asked the students about the new organ they had there. And he says, there are 4 keyboards controlling 4 divisions. Do you know what they are? And students were able to come up with great and swell. And then no more. And finally one girl said, well, Mr. Schreiner, it seems to me, I don't really know, but if the first 2 are great and swell, the other 2 must be keen and marvelous. And so then he explained the purpose of the choir, the great, the swell, and the solo. And then he said, we have even more divisions on the Salt Lake Tabernacle Organ. And I was happy that I could name those off too. So when the class was over, I wrote him a letter telling him how much I enjoyed it, how worthwhile it had been. And he wrote a note back to me. Dear Brother Robinson, thank you for your kind letter and thoughtful comments. I enjoyed the fine days at the BYU week, and I'm glad that you considered it so worthwhile. Every good wish and greeting. Sincerely yours, Alexander Schreiner. Then in 1960, when I was going into the MPC, I wrote Schreiner a letter and told him that I was coming and that I only had a Hammond to play, and I'd sure love to be able to play the Tabernacle organ. And he wrote back and said, come to see him after his Friday noon recital, and I could play the Tabernacle organ. So obviously I did, and that was a wonderful experience. He asked me to play from memory, Come Come Ye Saints, which fortunately I was able to do. And then I also played Franck's Piece Heroic and the well-played Bach Toccata in D minor. Well, three things that came out from that visit. Of course, when you're young, you want to see how grand and loud and powerful the organ could be. So on the big spot, I reached over with my foot and pressed on the full organ reversible and basked in the big glorious sound. So then when it was over, he said to me, turn that thing off. We never use it here. He says, well, Frank Asper uses it, but I never do. With all the resources of the Tabernacle organ, you can make an ensemble to fit the music, and that's what I do. And indeed he did. His playing was thrilling. The second thing is he told me that I'd probably gone about as far as I could go with the path that I was on. I needed a master teacher now, which I was eventually able to do. And then the third thing left me wondering for several years. He says, you are so taken with this instrument. Don't be. It's just wood and metal, and it has its limitations. I have a better organ at home. He says, I often come here with the sound in mind, and this organ won't give it to me. But my organ at home always gives me exactly what I want. And I thought, he has a better organ at home than the Tabernacle organ? How is that possible? And so, like I said, that was something that left me wondering for several years. And then later I found out what he was talking about. At home, his wife had done a tapestry needlepoint with an organ on it. And when he looked at it, he heard the sounds he wanted to hear. So then, third experience was totally unplanned. This was 1969. I was preparing for my master's recital, and I don't know why I was in the Westwood Ward Chapel at the time, but I was, and I was playing the music that I was preparing. And as I was playing, several people walked into the room, and I stopped playing and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a meeting here. I'll leave. And they said, oh no, we came to hear you. Came to hear me? And I said, yes, we were going to have a council meeting. The bishop just called and said he'd be a half hour late. And just then, Brother Schreiner walked through and said, right now, there's a master organist playing in your chapel. If I were you, I wouldn't wait here. I would go hear him. So, of course, that is the fond memory. Lastly, UCLA organ was used a lot, and in pollution, it was getting tired in 1969, so they rebuilt it and refurbished it and asked Schreiner to come play a recital on it, and which he did. And the organ had new keyboards at that time. Later in 1979, he'd retired in 1977, but they convinced him to come out of retirement and play for the 50th anniversary of Royce Hall at the organ. And he did that, and he came and played. Later, the Northridge earthquake happened and caused much damage to Royce Hall and the organ, so it had to be rebuilt again. But the keyboards weren't damaged. Here at home, my keyboards, which were approaching 100 years old, were worn out and notes sticking sometimes, so I needed new keyboards. And I was able to buy the UCLA keyboards, so these keyboards are the keyboards that Alexander Schreiner played his 1969 recital on and his last 1979 recital on, and I was fortunate to get them.